Sunday sunset, we're lying on my bed with 5 hours to go. Fingers entwined, and so were our minds crying, I don't want you to go. You wiped away tears, but not fears, under the still and clear indigo. You said, baby, don't cry, we'll be fine. You're the one thing I swear I can't outgrow. My mother said the younger me was a pretending prodigy. Well, nothing that much has changed. 'Cause while you're wolfing down liquor, my soul, it gets sicker. But I'm sticking to the screenplay. Gotta say I'm okay, but answer this, babe. How is it now that somehow you're a stranger? You were mine just yesterday. I pray the block in my airway dissipates and instead deters your airplane's way. But heaven denied, destiny decried, full died too soon. But I'm letting go. Get me wrong, I'll always love you, that's why I wrote you this very last song. I guess this is where we say goodbye. I know I'll be alright. Someday I'll be fine, but just not tonight. Plunging into all kinds of diversions, like lush wine and senor soirees. But even with gin and surging adrenaline, I see you're all that can intoxicate. Oceans and engines, you're skilled at infringing on great love affairs. 'Cause now my heart's home, all I've known is long gone and 10,000 miles away. And I'm not okay, but I'm letting go. I'm giving up the ghost, but don't get me wrong, I'll always love you, that's why I wrote you this very last song. I guess this is where we say goodbye. I know I'll be alright, but just not tonight. Was the first time I stared into seas of beguiling sepia 2 years ago. And the first time I learned real world superpowers, lived in 3 words, they revitalized my brain bones. Now what do you do when your pillar crumbled down and lost on solid ground, with dreams and demons drowning? This was all you found out. Lighted. I have so many questions, but I'm pouring them into the ocean, starting up my engine, and I'm letting go. I'm giving up your ghost. It's come to a close. I marked the end with this last song I wrote. I'm letting go. This is the last falsetto I'll ever sing to you, my great lost love.
I'm still alive, but I'm barely breathing. Just praying to a God that I don't believe in. 'Cause I got time while she got freedom. 'Cause when a heart breaks, no, it don't break even. The best days will be some of my worst. She finally met a man that's gonna put her first. While I'm wide awake, she's no trouble sleeping. 'Cause when a heart breaks, no, it don't break even. No. What am I supposed to do when the best part of me was always you? What am I supposed to say when I'm all choked up that you're okay? I'm falling to pieces, yeah. I'm falling to pieces. They say bad things happen for a reason. Wild words gon' stop the bleeding. 'Cause she's moved on while I'm still grieving. And when a heart breaks, no, it don't break even. No. And what am I gonna do when the best part of me was always you? And what am I supposed to say when I'm all choked up that you're okay? I'm falling to pieces. I'm falling to pieces. I'm falling to pieces. Still up while the other one's pieces. I'm falling to pieces. When the heart breaks, so it don't break even. Oh, you got his heart and my heart and none of the pain. You took your suitcase, I took the blue. Now I'm trying to make sense of what little remains. Oh, 'cause you left me with no love and no love to my name. I'm still alive, but I'm barely breathing. Just praying to a God that I don't believe in. 'Cause I got time while she got freedom. 'Cause when a heart breaks, no, it don't break. No, it don't break, no, it don't break even. No. What am I gonna do when the best part of me was always you? What am I supposed to say when I'm all choked up that you're okay? I'm falling to pieces, yeah. I'm falling to pieces, yeah. I'm falling to pieces. Still up while the other one's pieces. I'm falling to pieces. Heart breaks, no, it don't break even. Oh, it don't break even, no. Oh, it don't break even, no. Oh, it don't break even, no.
Harus bagaimana lagi mencuri perhatianmu? Suka sama aku. Aku sudah dandan rapi, semprot parfum sana sini. Kurang apa lagi? Dari depan, dari samping, dari mana-mana aku tetap tampan. Lagi bobo, bangun bobo, mau bagaimana juga tetap tampan. Emang
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Manning and I'm a Flutter engineer, so I create Flutter apps.
Able to pass in something dynamic we return. So like the thing up going with this so and our theme, and it's in a method. See, it's just like loading the location screen. So let's troubleshoot why this is happening. So in our app.dart, and then
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Manning and I'm a Flutter engineer, so I create Flutter apps in my free time and I kind of also create tutorial videos about it. So I am the creator of fluttercrashcourse.com. Thanks very much to freecodecamp.org for sponsoring this video, and let's get started.
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Manning, and this is my Flutter crash course. So I'm really excited to offer this to you because I've taken about 6 or 8 months of filming and content creation, and I've boiled it down into this course. And what it's meant to do is save you time learning Flutter. So what you see here is my show notes, and as every video I'm going to do, I'm going to walk through my show notes so you can read along and take notes on your own. And in terms of my background, I've been writing software for about 20 years, 5 of those as an iOS engineer. So to follow along, some of you might not want to follow along, you just want to watch, that's fine, but you're going to need everything that the Flutter website says. So any kind of main operating system, popular operating system, latest version of Flutter, and an iOS simulator or Android emulator. So make sure you have that installed and all set up. So if you want to, if you don't know how to set that up or you're having problems, you can go to my website or the YouTube channel that I have, and I have specific videos on how to set up Flutter step-by-step for Windows and OS X. So experience level required. So you need to have experience with one existing programming language and also something that you've coded, like a website or a web app or even a mobile app. You don't need to, but something that you've done in the past so that you know some basic programming, you have some basic programming skills. So let's get started here. If you want to, again, go see other videos, check out fluttercrashcourse.com, but we're going to now start our first lesson, which is chapter 1, which is creating a basic screen. So stay tuned. Hey everyone, so in this lesson we're going to cover layout in Flutter. So we're going to be using a widget called column, and what column does is it lets us lay out widgets from top to bottom. So let me show you what we're going to call it. We're going to now start our first lesson, which is chapter 1, which is creating a basic screen. So stay tuned. Hey everyone, so in this lesson we're going to cover layout in Flutter. So we're going to be using a widget called column, and what column does is it lets us lay out widgets from top to bottom. So let me show you what we're going to be eventually coding. This is the location detail screen of our app. It's called the Tourism Co app, and the location detail screen shows a number of things, and you can tell that we can use this column widget because widgets here are laid out from top to bottom. So there's another widget called row, and row
Server lemot, resource limited, kurang fleksibel. Saatnya beralih ke VPS hostinger. Server.
So what is Flutter? Flutter is a tool that allows you to build native cross-platform, and that means for iOS and Android, apps with one programming language and code base. So let's have a closer look at this nice sentence here. Important is that we build native cross-platform apps. So we build both an iOS app and an Android app. We're not building a web app that runs in the browser. We're not building an app that gets wrapped by native apps. We build real apps, 2 different kinds of apps in the end for iOS and Android, which you then distribute through the different app stores. So through the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That's what you get as a result. Now you get there by using one programming language so that you don't have to learn 2 different programming languages, one for iOS and one for Android. Instead you have one programming language, Dart, but I'll come back to that, and also one code base. So you work in one project, you write your code once, and you still get 2 different apps as a result. And that's the cool thing about Flutter. You only learn one programming language, you only write your code once, and you get 2 apps. Without Flutter, you would normally build an iOS app by writing some Swift or Objective-C code and using the iOS development environment. And for Android, you would be using Java with the Android framework, or you would be using Kotlin and also the Android development environment. And you would have to learn all these different languages and tools, and you would have to write two totally different apps or work in two totally different projects. And with Flutter, that's not the case. One programming language and one code base. If we have a closer look at Flutter, though, it's actually a combination of things. The term Flutter refers to two major things. One is a SDK, a software development kit. You could say a collection of tools that allows you to write one code base or use one code base with one programming language, because it includes tools to then compile this code, which normally would not run on iOS and Android, into native machine code that does run on these platforms. Because if there would be one programming language that would work on both platforms, we wouldn't need Flutter, but there isn't. Now, therefore, the one programming language Flutter uses doesn't work on iOS and Android, so it needs to be compiled to native machine code for iOS and native machine code for Android, so that we have code that does run on these platforms. And that compilation task, along with a couple of other things, that's all part of Flutter. But of course, it's not just a collection of tools. It also gives you everything you need to create beautiful applications. It gives you a framework, a widget library for that one programming language, which is called Dart, which you can use to build beautiful Flutter apps. And that's what we will spend the majority of time with, of course. It gives you a vast collection of reusable UI building blocks, these so-called widgets. So these are things like buttons, tabs, text inputs, drop-downs. You get all of that out of the box. You can style them and customize them, and then you build user interfaces with these tools. In addition, you get a couple of utility functions and generally some packages that help you build what your users see and what your users interact with. And then that code which you build with the help of that framework, that is then compiled to native machine code with the help of the SDK. So that is what Flutter is. Now, as I mentioned, Flutter uses a programming language called Dart. Dart is a programming language which is focused on building front-end user interfaces, front-end apps. It's not limited to building mobile apps, that's just what Flutter uses it for, but Dart is independent of Flutter, and you can also build web apps with Dart. But we'll not focus just on Dart here, we'll focus on Flutter and how it uses Dart. And Flutter uses Dart mostly for building mobile apps. So it's a programming language built to make it really simple to build front-end user interfaces. It's a programming language which was developed by Google, or is developed by Google, just like Flutter. So these are actually two independent teams in Google, but of course they're working together to improve each other, and therefore we have a hand-in-hand solution here. And in case you already have some programming experience, it's an object-oriented and strongly typed language, and its syntax is a bit like a mixture of JavaScript, Java, C#, but you don't need to know any of these languages, and actually you don't need to know anything about programming to follow along. In this course, I will teach you Dart from scratch along with Flutter. So we'll build Flutter apps and you'll learn Dart and the features you're using there along the way, because I think that's the most fun way of learning that programming language and already see nice results, the apps we're building. So Flutter and Dart are not really alternatives, instead they're working together. Flutter builds up on Dart, it's a framework for Dart, and Dart actually is the programming language which we're using. Flutter then just is a collection of tools, a set of features, utility functions, and these widgets, which are implemented using Dart, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel there, but you can write your own Dart code and use these existing widgets in your code, so that you don't have to, again, reinvent how a button should look like and work, but use the pre-built button instead, and then just customize it to your requirements. That's how this works. And in addition, as mentioned, Flutter also gives you that SDK, so all these tools for compiling your code in the end. So now that we know what Flutter is, or that we at least have a rough idea about that, let's have a look at the architecture of a Flutter application. And there, the most important thing, which you'll see over and over throughout the course, is that Flutter has that idea of building user interfaces as code. That's called UI as code. You build a widget tree in your Flutter apps, and I'll come back to that in a second. In the end, the idea is that you will have no visual drag and drop editor for adding buttons or text inputs to your screens to what the user sees. Instead, you'll work only in code, will write everything in code, and whilst this might sound intimidating at first, you will see that Flutter has a really nice approach for that, which makes creating interfaces with this UI as code approach a breeze. Now, besides this core idea of how you build your apps in Flutter, this UI as code approach, it's also important to understand that Flutter apps do actually embrace platform differences whilst being based on one code base. So we work in one project, but we will still have the ability to create different user interfaces at some points or in some parts of our app if we need it for the different platforms. Because Android and iOS are not exactly the same. They're not just for different phones. They do have some small differences, and sometimes it doesn't matter to you, but if it does, Flutter gives you the tools to find out on which platform you're running, so that if you're on Android, you can execute code A, and if you're on iOS, you can execute code B. So Flutter gives you the full flexibility there. Now let's first of all have a look at that widget thing again. In Flutter, everything's a widget. That's important.
ChatGPT can now create website wireframes. With our new custom GPT, we go
to understand. If you had an app that looks like this, then this is a bunch of widgets. For example, here, the app bar at the top with the tabs in there, that's one huge widget with a lot of smaller widgets in there. And all these elements on the screen are just widgets in the end. You build your entire screen, your entire app from such widgets. Actually, the whole page is a widget, and even the whole app is wrapped in one main widget. And a widget, as you will see throughout this course, is really just a code snippet, an instruction you place in your code. Something like, please render a button here. That's a widget. It'll be as simple as that. Your entire app is therefore built as a widget tree. You have this root widget, which is your app itself. Then you might have different screens there. On the different screens, you have different sections. And in there, you might have text inputs, text outputs, buttons, tabs, drop-downs. And a widget might hold other widgets. For example, your tabs widget might hold individual tab widgets. But thinking about this in an abstract way can be really difficult. And therefore, for now, just keep that term widget tree in mind. We'll have a look at how this works and how this looks. And we'll actually write all the code for that together throughout the course. Now, this UI as code concept is also important. If you had an application that looks like this here, then, as I mentioned earlier, you don't build it by dragging and dropping elements into a visual editor. You have no visual editor indeed. Instead, you only work in code. The code for this could look like that here. And here you already get a brief preview at how these widgets work and how you structure your entire app with the help of these widgets, how you configure your app with these widgets. And as you can see, even without understanding that code, that probably doesn't look too difficult. In the end, here we just have a bunch of instructions on what should get rendered on the screen and how the different things are related. And of course, you'll learn all about that throughout the course. So this is an extremely straightforward way of building your app, and I will introduce you to this approach carefully, step by step. We'll build our apps from scratch, and I will introduce you to the core widgets and how they work together step by step in this course. Now, this one code base thing or concept is also important to understand. In the end, you will have a bunch of Dart files in your project, and these will make up your application, and you build an Android and an iOS app based on the one project. But as I mentioned, if you need to, you can still find out on which platform you are running and then render different content based on that platform. So these are the core Flutter ideas. Again, if they're not 100% clear at this point, that's normal. We just started. We'll, of course, use all these features and go through all these features step by step as we progress through the course. Now, how does Flutter and Dart therefore then work internally? How is your Flutter app actually converted to a native app which can be published to the app stores? Well, you have your Dart code, which uses the Flutter framework, or the Flutter API as I call it here, which stands for Application Programming Interface. In the end, that just means that Flutter gives you a collection of functions, of widgets, which you can use in your code to build the interface you want to build. So you have your own widgets in your own code then, composed of that set of built-in widgets or your own widgets, which you can also build. And you want to build for Android and iOS. Now, as I said, Flutter simply compiles that Dart code to native code for these different platforms. And that happens with the help of the Flutter SDK. And as a result, you get real apps spit out with highly optimized, high-performance code that's based on your code, but that's not your code itself. Instead, it's a compiled version of that code. And therefore, you really ship code that runs on the different platforms and that's optimized and high performance. Because performance is actually a huge advantage of Flutter apps. Flutter out of the box gives you high-performance application for these different platforms. And that happens with the help of the Flutter SDK. And as a result, you get real apps spit out with highly optimized, high-performance code that's based on your code, but that's not your code itself. Instead, it's a compiled version of that code. And therefore, you really ship code that runs on the different platforms and that's optimized and high performance. Because performance is actually a huge advantage of Flutter apps. Flutter out of the box gives you high-performance applications. Now, in case you worked before with, let's say, React Native, which is kind of an alternative to Flutter, and I'll come back to this in a second, it's important to understand that Flutter does not use platform primitives. Now, what do I mean with that? We're having our Flutter app and we're targeting iOS and Android. Now, if we want to add a button, then in Flutter, with this UI as code approach, we do so by adding a raised button. Now, this is just an instruction in your Flutter code which tells Flutter to render a button in that part of your widget tree. Now, you could think that what happens when the code gets compiled to that native code is that this raised button is translated to, hey, iOS, please give me your default button, which would be a UI button element in the iOS development world, and for Android, a widget.button, that we get these native buttons, which are, of course, part of the native development environments. And that's not what happens. Instead, Flutter has its own implementations because Flutter, and that's really important to understand and to keep in mind, directly controls every pixel on the screen. So Flutter does not compile your code to some native equivalents or native alternatives. Instead, Flutter ships with its own engine, which controls the entire screen, everything the user sees, and renders every pixel on its own. And that gives Flutter a lot of control and a lot of flexibility. Now, you don't have to care too much about that because Flutter does it for you, but it's important to be aware of that because that gives Flutter more control and less limitations, and therefore you implicitly, indirectly benefit from that. You have a good performance, you have a lot of power, a lot of things you can configure, you have full control over how you want to build your user interface. So now that we have a basic idea about what Flutter is and how it roughly works, it's important to understand how Flutter is versioned. Flutter is relatively new. It's been around for a couple of years, but especially over the last year, it got a lot of traction and is really pushed by Google now. And therefore, Flutter versions are changing frequently. Now, this does not mean, however, that Flutter changes all the time, that everything about Flutter changes all the time. Instead, indeed, Flutter actually is pretty stable, and the core API, the core features which you therefore also learn about in this course, will not change. Instead, new versions bring bug fixes, smaller improvements, often also some behind-the-scenes changes which you don't even see, and maybe also some new niche features. So maybe some new features which you don't directly need in your app, or which now allow you to implement something in a different way than you did it before, but your old way also still works, but you could now also use a different way. These are typically the things that change. And therefore, you will of course also see that in this course, I record a certain video with version, let's say 1.6, and you're viewing the course when the latest version is 1.9, but this does not mean that what you learn is not accurate anymore. Instead, this course is fully up to date, and I will keep it up to date. And actually, I already did replace all the videos in the course once to improve the overall course quality and reflect a couple of important new features. I wouldn't have needed to do so, because what I taught still was right. As I mentioned, it's not like everything changing all the time, but there were some things that could now be done in an easier way since I recorded my first version of this course when Flutter was still in beta. Now it's been stable for a while, and therefore no large changes are to be expected, but whenever something does change or does need updating, I will keep this course up to date. And now that we have that out of the way, it's time to set up Flutter, set up the development environment for Flutter, and build our first little Flutter application. And as a side note, the next videos actually are from my first version of this course, therefore there you still see the beta version of Flutter. The setup hasn't changed a bit. The look of the website has changed a tiny bit, but the steps are the same, the result is the same. That's why I kept these videos around. They're 100% accurate, nonetheless, but really keep this version thing in mind. And whenever something changes and doesn't work anymore, I will fix it and update it, no worries. So with that, let's build our first Flutter app and see how Flutter actually works and how we can build Flutter applications together. So let's install Flutter then. And the installation actually differs between Mac OS and Windows. For the rest of the course, the code we write and so on will be the same, but here for the installation it differs. So therefore, in this video, we'll set up Flutter and all the surrounding packages and dependencies we need for Mac, and in the next video, we'll do the same for Windows. So if you are a Windows user, you can simply skip this video, and if you are a Mac user, you can skip the next video. So let's proceed with the Mac setup then. On flutter.io, you can simply click on Get Started, and then choose Install on Mac OS. In the last video, we installed Flutter for Mac. Now, if you're using Windows, let's now install it for Windows too. If you're using Mac only, you can therefore skip this video. So, to install Flutter on Windows, first of all, let's visit flutter.io, click on Get Started there, and then choose Install on Windows. There you will see all the installation steps in detail, and I strongly recommend also going through these step by step along with the video. Because, for one, they can change in one or the other detail in the future, and then this is great to see or easy to see in that written form. And additionally, it's easy to miss a step, and therefore this is a great companion for this video. So first of all, let's have a look at the system requirements. We install Flutter on our machine. We need Windows 7 or higher, the disk space, which is mentioned here, and important, one of these two tools, PowerShell or Git for Windows. Now, Git is a versioning system, and even if you don't use it actively, Flutter does use it. So here, I'll install Git for Windows by clicking on that link. Then we have the chance to download that Git tool from that Git page here. It should automatically give you the right download for your machine. Download it, and then walk through the installer. Now, in the installer, you can choose the place where you want to install Git, then simply hit Next and, well, install that tool. Now, very important, you click Next a couple of times, and most of the default settings are fine. One important thing to note is that on this screen here, you should use Git from the Windows command prompt. Don't use one of the other two options, use the middle one here. This is also mentioned in the official docs. Now, with that, hit Next a couple of times and leave all the other defaults. And with all that, simply hit Next one last time, and it will install Git on your machine. And with that, you're fine. You can now close this and continue in the setup instructions. The next step is to actually install the Flutter SDK, which you can get from this download link here. Now, important, the version of Flutter, of course, will change in the future. Right now, it's 0.3.2.beta. It's production ready already, and the code you learn in this course will still be all correct in the future, even if you are downloading a different version, but make sure to download the version you're seeing here. So whatever version that is for you. So this will now also be downloaded. Will take a couple of seconds since it's quite a big file. And once it is downloaded, you can extract this folder into the place where you want to install that Flutter tool. Now, important, the Flutter tool is not your project for your mobile app. It's a SDK, a software development kit, which you install globally on your machine and which you will use from different places on your machine to create new Flutter projects and to work with the ones you created. So to build them, to run them on an emulator, things like that. So unzip Flutter into that directory. The next step is to actually install the Flutter SDK, which you can get from this download link here. Now important, the version of Flutter, of course, will change in the future. Right now it's 0.3.2.beta. It's production ready already, and the code you learn in this course will still be correct in the future, even if you are downloading a different version, but make sure to download the version you're seeing here. So whatever version that is for you. So this will now also be downloaded. Will take a couple of seconds, since it's quite a big file. And once it is downloaded, you can extract this folder into the place where you want to install that Flutter tool. Now important, the Flutter tool is not your project for your mobile app. It's a SDK, a software development kit, which you install globally on your machine and which you will use from different places on your machine to create new Flutter projects and to work with the ones you created. So to build them, to run them on an emulator, things like that. So unzip Flutter into that directory. And once you unzipped it, you can go into that directory. And in my case here, I'll also move all the files up one folder so that they're all directly in the Flutter folder. And then you can execute that flutter console.bat file here. Now this will open up a command prompt which already uses Flutter. And you could stop here and continue with the Flutter commands and with bringing up your Android emulator and so on, and always open that tool here to run the Flutter commands which you need to run or build your app. However, I want to be able to use the normal command prompt. So let's close the Flutter console here. And let's move on and make sure that we can use the Flutter commands from the normal Windows command prompt. For that, we'll need to update our path. Now, the path, that simply is a global variable which Windows uses to find the tools we can use from the command line. And since we picked a custom folder where we installed Flutter, or where we unpacked it to, we need to make Windows aware of where that is. You do that by opening your control panel and then going to User Accounts, and there simply click on Change My Environment Variables. Now, in the window which opens, you should find a path entry which you can select and where you then can click Edit. Now, here you can add new locations of tools you want to be able to execute to that path by clicking on New here. And then here you need to enter the path to your Flutter folder, so the folder you unpacked. Simply go into your Windows Explorer and there navigate into the bin subfolder, to be precise, that is what you need. Copy the path to that bin subfolder and add it to your path variable by clicking New, adding it to that empty blank space which opens up, and thereafter hitting OK. Now you're prepared to run Flutter commands from the normal command prompt. Click OK, and make sure to close any command prompts you might have opened already. Restart Windows if you're facing issues thereafter. And once you did all that, you can bring up the normal command prompt and simply enter Flutter there. Now, this might show you a warning regarding the installation being a bit older. You can ignore that because we actually did just install the latest version, so that will be all right. But the fact that you're seeing this and not something like Flutter not recognized means that we did successfully add it to our path and that we can use that Flutter command line tool from our command prompt. Now, Flutter is now available. The next step we have to do is we have to set up Android Studio. This is the official SDK provided by Google for building Android apps. And whilst we will not write native code with it, it includes all the SDKs and build tools Flutter will need too. So simply go to developer.android.com/studio or use the link you find in the Flutter installation documentation and download the Android Studio version there. It should automatically give you the right version for your operating system. You need to accept the agreement before you can continue. And with that, the download will start, and it will also take a while since it's also quite a big download. So let me fast forward to the point where this is done. Now, once the download did finish, simply execute the, executable you got, and the installer will start. Now, there you can continue. Make sure to choose Android Virtual Device as a component you want to install, though. That's important that you tick that. Thereafter, you can choose the location where you want to install Android Studio, and you can use the default here or pick your own location on your machine, and then you can simply hit Next. Now, this will again take a couple of seconds. And once it's done, you can start the Android Studio, and for the first time you start it, a wizard will come up, which allows you to configure it. Now, in that wizard, hit Next, and then choose Custom here. And the next step is that you can choose your UI theme. Now, that's mostly important if you want to use Android Studio to build your Flutter apps, which you can. However, I will use a different IDE in this course, and I will go with the dark theme here, but of course, you can choose your favorite look. In the next step, it's important that you check Android Virtual Device, that this option is ticked, because we will need to be able to bring up such virtual devices. With that ticked, choose your Android SDK location, use the default or create your own path, and thereafter simply hit Next. Now, this will install a couple of things, and you can start the installation by hitting Finish here. This will actually take quite long because it downloads and installs a lot of packages, so don't worry if this takes a couple of minutes, maybe even 20 minutes or something like this, and I will be back once it's done for me. Once the installation did finish, you can, well, close the installer, and then bring up Android Studio again. Now here, you can open an existing Android Studio project, which would be your Flutter app you're working on, but we don't have such an app yet. So our next step actually is to create such an app. However, we will need an emulator to view it. So let's make sure we fulfill all requirements for that. You can see them here in the official docs. And by the way, if you want to install your app on a real device, that is something we'll also do later in the course. And you can, of course, already go through the steps you see here if that's important to you right now already. But again, we'll do this together later in the course. For the majority of the course, we will work on the emulator though. So there on the emulator, you see that it's important that we have hardware acceleration enabled on our machine. Click that link to learn more about it and see how to turn it on. And thereafter, we can go back to Android Studio, and now we need that Flutter project to continue. So back to the command prompt. There, you should now navigate into the folder where you want to create your new Flutter project. You can navigate around in Windows with the cd command to change the directory you're in the command prompt. Now make sure to create a folder and navigate into that folder where you want to store your Flutter app. And once you're in that folder, you can create a new Flutter application and project by running flutter create and then the name of your project. Now important, that name must not contain a dash or something like that, also not a white space. Words should be separated with underscores, or you simply use one word only. So flutter create first underscore app is my command here to create this project. And now this will add a new folder in the location you're in the command prompt and configure your first Flutter project in there. As you can see, it creates a couple of files. And once it's done with all that, you can open the project in Android Studio by clicking on Open an existing Android Studio project. And there, you should navigate to that folder you just created and open it there in the Flutter folder. In my case, so basically open that project you just created, first underscore app in my case. This will open it in Android Studio. And before we do anything there, let's bring up that virtual device. You can do that by, in Android Studio, going to Tools, and then AVD Manager, which stands for Android Virtual Device Manager. And in the window, which then opens up, you can start a new virtual device by clicking on to Create Virtual Device. You should also have one by default, which you can use, but let me show you how to create a new one. There you choose your blueprint, basically regarding the general hardware and layout profile. I'll go with the Pixel 2 here. On the next screen, you choose the image, the Android version you want to use, and I recommend not going with the cutting-edge version, but using the latest stable version, in my case, Oreo, API level 27. Typically, that's the one which is selected by default. Hit Next again. Now on the next screen, make sure to choose hardware acceleration from the graphics drop-down there. And you can have a look at the advanced settings, but you typically don't need to change these. And with that all done, you can finish that and create that new virtual device. Now with it created, you can start it by clicking on that play button on the right, and this will open the virtual device on your Screen. It will bring up an Android phone on your machine, so to say. Now, with it running, we can't run our Flutter app yet because we still need to do some things. For one, we need to install the missing dependencies, the missing plugins. For that, click on Install Plugins here at the top where it tells you about the missing Dart plugin. You could, by the way, also skip this if you already installed the Flutter plugin, but here I do it in 2 separate steps. So install that Dart plugin. Once the installer is done, you need to restart Android Studio. And once you restart it, you should actually get a message here at the bottom where it suggests you a new plugin. Expand that message and click on Configure Plugins, and there it will suggest the Flutter plugin. Simply accept this by clicking OK, and now it will install the Flutter plugin too, and that would have installed the Dart plugin with it, so you can actually do that in 1 step only. And once this is done, you need to restart the IDE one more time. So let's do that. Let's restart the IDE again. And now we have Android Studio configured to support Flutter. Now, we still don't see our emulator here at the top, and therefore we still can't start our application. Let's quit the emulator for now. And to make it work, first of all, go back to the setup instructions and make sure to install that Google USB driver. Now, that should only be important for running it on a real device, but it still doesn't hurt to set it up already so that it will work later. So click on that link you see there and install the USB driver. You can do that from within Android Studio by going back into it. And there, going to Tools, SDK Manager. And in the SDK Manager, go to SDK Tools and choose Google USB driver there. Hit OK thereafter, or apply, and install it. You also need to accept the license agreements there. Now, with it installed, you will need to also do one more thing. If you installed your Android SDK in a different place on your operating system than the one suggested during the wizard, which I did, you need to add one other environment variable. You can also see that if you go back to the command prompt and run Flutter Doctor, a tool which tells you what's missing. Here it tells me that it's unable to locate the Android SDK. And therefore, I will go back to my control panel and there to user accounts, and then change my environment variables. And first of all, we need to add a brand new variable. So click New here. And then name that variable, and the name is important, Android_home, all uppercase. Make sure to not add a typo. Now, with that name defined, you need to define a value, and that simply is a path pointing to the Android SDK. You can click Browse Directory here to choose the Android SDK location, and there simply choose the location you selected during the wizard, or in the wizard, which opened or which ran when you opened Android Studio. In my case, it's the Android folder. It should be this folder, which has a platforms, emulator, and so on subfolder. Simply hit OK with the root folder selected, and now you also need to add something to your path variable. So select that again and click on Edit, and there you need to add 2 new entries. The first one should be %, and then Android home, so that variable name you just created, written exactly in the same way, and then another %, \tools, and then you need to add one other entry, which is also %, Android home, \platform tools. Make sure it's written exactly as you see it here in the video. Now, with that added, hit OK and restart the command prompt. And now also restart your virtual device by quitting it, potentially wiping the user data if you're facing issues restarting it, and then hitting the green play button again. This will bring up the emulator again. And now you should see it here in the dropdown selected. And now you can press that Run button to run your Flutter app on that virtual device. Now, this build process, which will start it on the device, can take a couple of minutes when you run it the first time. Don't worry about that. And once it's done, you should see your Flutter app running on that emulator. And you can hit the plus button here to increment the counter. Pretty awesome. Our Flutter app finally running on an emulator. And of course, we'll change this app soon. Now, as I mentioned, I won't use Android Studio as an editor here, and therefore, I also want to show you a way of running this without Android Studio. You can do that by going to the command prompt, navigating into the folder where you have your first app or into this project folder you created, and in there, you can run flutter run. And this will now do the exact same as you did with the command inside, or with the click of the button inside Android Studio, but without you doing it through Android Studio. It will build the app and ship it to your emulator and run it there. And this is actually how I will run my apps for the rest of this course, since I won't use Android Studio. You can use either approach, however, using Flutter Run will have advantages like the hot reloading I'll introduce in a second. Now, which editor will I use then? I will use Visual. In the last video, we installed Flutter for Mac. Now, if you're using Windows, let's now install it for Windows 2. If you're using Mac only, you can therefore skip this video. So, to install Flutter,